Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Helen Thomas on the CDFM study group. This is the weekly review of the Certified Defense Financial Manager Information and Study Guides. So if you're studying to take the CDFM exam so that you can earn your certification, you are in the right location. However, we are reviewing CDFM Module 4. Module 4 is the optional module or optional exam that you can take later on. After you earn your certification, you can take the Module 4 to earn the designation as an acquisition professional. So that's what the A stands for, acquisition. Alright, so we're going to continue review of CDFM Module 4. Today we're covering Competency 6, which is Net Centricity and Global Information, and number 7. And Competency 7 is Technology Protection. So if you view the study guide as one continuous document, then it'll be easier for you to comprehend the bits and pieces. So before we go into today's lesson, I'm going to kind of recap again how we get to this point. So remember, there are 3 DoD support systems: JCITS, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, that is the responsibility of the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and the Joint Requirements Oversight Council. It's made up of joint personnel, Army, Navy, Air Force, and so forth. You have the PPBE process, Plan, Program, Budget, Execution, responsibility of the Deputy SecDef. And then you have the third system, which is the Defense Acquisition System. Those 3 DoD support systems overlap to meet the National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy strives to meet the big op order, which is the National Security Strategy. And so what happens is, once the National Security Council publishes the big op order, the National Security Strategy, the DoD pulls out the defense-related things and develops and publishes the National Defense Strategy, and then we use those 3 systems to fulfill that strategy. So part of that process is the Joint Requirements Oversight Council needs to take that National Defense Strategy and determine what are the military-related requirements, and then what capabilities do we have to meet those requirements, and what capability gaps do we face to meet that strategy. And so what the JCIDS process does is the JROC looks at the .MLPF. They look at doctrine, organization, training, material, and so forth. All of those acronyms, they look at the acronym to determine where does the capability gap lie. If it lies in anything other than material, it triggers the PPBE system. If it requires a material solution, an aircraft, a vehicle, a DoD system, automation system, then it'll trigger the acquisition system. And so what the Module 4 is covering is the acquisition system. So that's what brings us here. And so what the JROC does, once they identify the capability gap, they also need to identify a solution to fill that gap. The solution is published on an initial capabilities document. I got to get my acronyms together. So the ICD, the initial capabilities document, is the document that says this is the capability gap, this is what it's going to take to fill it, these are the things that this equipment needs to be able to do, the key performance measures, the objectives, what it needs to accomplish, and then we begin the acquisition process, the phases. Material solution analysis. They look at courses of action, looking at the objectives, and then you have the courses of action to determine which one will best fit that initial capabilities document. We'll have all those requirements. And so the last couple of weeks, we look at the systems. We look at now, if we build that aircraft, how do we, if we have to introduce a human being to fly the aircraft, what are the security considerations? So human systems integration was one of the topics we talked about. Let me look back and see. So I'm recapping and try and tie it all together. The resource management piece of it is making sure that we have the right funding, RDT&E, procurement, MILCON, O&M, MILPERS, and where do we need that in that phase? You look at earned value management. When you deal with a contractor, we look at cost, schedule, performance. We need to measure the price that you estimated the action to be, that equipment to be, and the current price. The schedule, how long they said it was going to take to do that work. What's the current schedule? Performance, how well does it perform? We looked at life cycle sustainment, the life cycle sustainment plan created by the program manager. And we already talked about human systems integration, the skill level that individual will need to have, the training, the rank, all of those is human systems integration. So today we go over net centricity and global. Let's say that aircraft also has to use technology. It has to use GPS and all those automated things that needs to be integrated. So we need to consider net centricity and global information grid. And so on the bottom of page 461, you have the definition of net centricity. It is a robust global environment where you have interconnecting infrastructure system. Is like how far can you communicate when you utilize this system. So these are just things you have to consider. It also talks about the global information grid, the GIG. It's a departmental, interconnected, end-to-end set of information capabilities. And it has 3 perspectives. So let me see, does it have it on this page? Yep. So on page 462 at the bottom, it talks about the net centricity. It gives you the definition, the 4 key attributes we're going to look at, so I'm not going to talk about them here. And then the GIG, it gives you the definition in the first paragraph, and then it also tells you you have to look at the 3 perspectives of the GIG is vision, implementation, and architecture. And so between page 2 and 4, you'll see the GIG vision empowers users through easy access information. So that means that if the user has to troubleshoot that equipment, there should be information readily available. Implementation is the existing globally interconnected end-to-end and set of capabilities of the managed information. So that's the existing information that's out there in the field, not directly related to the vision. And then the architecture describes how the IT is put together for that equipment. So GIG architecture, vision, and implementation. So that's on page 462 and 463. And then we move on to integrating this global system, the GIG, compliance with the Defense Acquisition System. That's the 3rd system we're in. So if you look on the start of page 4 and 5, it tells you which milestone. Again, success on this exam is you knowing what is happening in milestone A, milestone B, milestone C. So it says when you're talking about this network, the GIG, before milestone A, in that initial capabilities document that I talked about when I started that recap, the JROC identifies the capability gap and publishes that initial capabilities document. So on page 4, it's telling you in that initial capabilities document, they also address there's architectural work, there's net centricity, there's global information grid. All of that is included in that initial, the baseline, what the program manager produces. So all of that is done prior to milestone A. The second bullet on page 4, for business systems, architecture efforts should also align closely with the business enterprise architecture. It's pretty straightforward, right? So whatever systems, no matter what systems we are using, we need to make sure it all aligns with that business enterprise so that we can have supportability. That one system is not a standalone. You can have different systems that talks together. At the bottom of page 4, the start of page 5, before milestone B. So initially, the JROC produces an initial capabilities document. When we put it on paper, we don't know exactly what this thing looks like. But when you get to milestone B, where that formal acquisition program occurs, the JROC also develops a capability development document. Because in the first one, they did not pick a course of action. They just know this equipment needs to do X, Y, Z. Once they do that course of action in the analysis of the alternative in material solution analysis phase, milestone A, technology development, then we can have a course of action to move forward to recommend to in the milestone B. So that's updated information that's placed on a capability development document. And as they move along in the process of the phases and the milestone, and then in milestone C, before milestone C, you will have a capability production document produced by the JROC. Again, the JROC, Joint Forces, they represent the warfighter. So as they go through these steps, they're getting the updated information to say, okay, this is how you need to develop this equipment. And then when it's time to produce it, they have the updated information to say, this is what you need to consider when you are producing these equipment. So pretty straightforward. All right, so on the bottom of page 7, the introduction of the information technology and how it relates to national security systems, other systems. Reach, richness, agility, and assurance. So you're going to need to know the definitions. So we'll go to page 8 so you can clearly see the definitions of each. So if you get a multiple choice situation and they mix the words and the definitions up, you'll be able to know which is which. Reach on page 8 says, in terms of space of time. So again, we're talking about information technology. We're talking about the internet. Let's put it that way, right? Behind that internet scene, that's what we're talking about. So it's not physical distance. So distance is not a factor in this reach. But recognizing you got to integrate all these different moving pieces behind the scene, and it's a difference of time. Time is the limitation. How long is the information going to take to get from point A to point B through this network? So reach, richness, can be operationally defined in terms of the set of expertise, the information and or capabilities that can be brought to bear within a unit of time. How quickly, what is the quality of the information that we can get in a short amount of time to make a decision? Agility, the number of effective adaptations that can be accomplished per unit of time. Agility, being able to change the information. How often, how quickly can we change the course of action by utilizing this? So agility. And assurance, defined in terms of achieving an expected goal. So assurance that we will reach the intended goal. Reach, richness, agility, assurance. Reach, richness, agility, assurance. On page 9, we're going to be going into the definitions of interoperability, supportability. So a lot of this you'll see in module 4 is definitions. What do we need? Interoperability, the ability of the system to provide and accept information. So interoperability is if I put certain information on it, into that system, into that aircraft data system, what type of results am I going to get? So, and what type of input does it need? Supportability is the ability of systems and components external to that specific IT or NSS to aid, protect, or sustain the design. So supportability is now the defense mechanism that we use to protect that information system. Supportability. So if you look on the bottom of page 9, it goes into more detail. What do we need to enhance the system? That's supportability. So read through those definitions on the bottom of page 9. So the chart on the top of page 10 is kind of a recap of that life cycle of that request for the acquisition program, your milestones, your decision points. And so you see the ICD, initial capabilities document. I'm on the top of page 4610. And then prior to milestone B, you have the capabilities development document, the JROC. So that's a diagram that you can see the documents that we talked about. And then later on, prior to milestone C, you have the capabilities production document. So that's a diagram for you there. I have nothing there. Submission timeline on the bottom of page 13. All right. We have under the after milestone C, it says submit the updated ISP. But that paragraph under it, the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Network and Information Integration, OASD-NII. What do they do? They're responsible for reviewing all ISP documents. So let me flip back to ISP, Information Support Plan, right? Yes. So Information Support Plan is the information needs of the program. So it tells everything that that program needs. So on page 13, it's telling you that the CIO or the OASD-NII is the agency, is the individual, is that section that's responsible for reviewing that information, the information support plan. So that's something important for all those acquisition category 1, those major programs and major automated programs. So acquisition category 1 and 1 alpha. Electromagnetic spectrum consideration. The PM must consider electromagnetic spectrum when delivering capability to the warfighter. So that's part of their consideration. The fundamental questions are if and how the system or equipment being developed will depend or interact with the electromagnetic spectrum. ACAT 1 programs are embedded. So what you need to know as far as programs, are the programs embedded or standalone systems? And I think, let me see, needs to be operable. I was trying to see if it's written. I just have a note here to make sure that I say this. So the program manager must consider electromagnetic spectrum. That's what I just read. Delivering the capability. The fundamental questions are if and how the system will be developed depend on interactions with the electromagnetic spectrum, referred to as the spectrum. Will the system be, so when the individual, the human being is using that system or being trained, is it going to be embedded training or is it going to be a standalone system? Those are the consideration. So embedded is ACAT 1 program. That's the note I have. And ACAT 1A are often standalone systems. Right? Like your DTS, Defense Travel System, that's a DoD-wide system. It's a standalone. So ACAT 1A is standalone, and ACAT 1 is embedded into that aircraft, embedded into that vehicle. Alright, got lots of information. No defense business system. Touch a little bit on page 17. We talked about ensuring that we are in line, the net centricities, all of that is in line with the business system, but it gives you a definition. Again, I told you module 4 is a lot of definition. The term defense business system means an information system other than a national security system. So you got the definition on the first line on page 17. So I'm also looking at my notes so I make sure I hit those particular points. Defense business system management. So defense business systems are those information systems not considered national security systems. All right, I got it. All right, so on page 19, as we're talking about defense business systems, we'll first look at the top of page 4619, a committee, Defense Business System Management Committee. Even if you didn't read the definition, what does that tell you? Okay, it looks like they manage defense business system, right? Defense Business System Management Committee, chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Okay. It is the highest authority providing top-level governance, coordinate defense business system modernization. So Defense Business System Management Committee, the DBSMC, is the forum chaired by the Deputy SecDef that handles defense business systems. All of that out of that one paragraph. Certifying authority. The designated principal staff assistant with responsibility for review, approval, oversight, development, maintenance, and modernization is called the certifying authority. So that's pretty straightforward. So the next one, the CA, certifying authority, is a primary authority who certifies that system. So they have designated particular sections to certify those systems. So PNR, the USD for personnel and readiness, acquisition, technology, and logistics is, so remember we talked about milestone decision authority, same thing as certification authority. So for acquisition, AT&L, if it's an acquisition, technology, and logistics system, then the Undersecretary of Defense, acquisition, technology, and logistics is responsible for it. Financial management system, the USD Comptroller. If it's an information system, Assistant Secretary of Defense, Network and Information Integration. That's that NII we talked about before. That's in charge of those network. So you got those 4 certifying authorities for at the DoD level, depending on the type of system being reviewed. Investment Review Board. It's another important board. Each certification authority is required to establish an IRB. So just like your USD AT&L, the acquisition guy has the Defense Acquisition Board. That is their review board that they have. So each one of them, each one of those 4 is what it's saying, must have an investment review board. The next paragraph under that, let me write my notes. For defense business system acquisition programs that have modernization funding exceeding $1 million, the Milestone Decision Authority shall not grant milestone or full rate production approval or the equivalent, and the authority to obligate funding shall not be granted until the certification required by 10 U.S. Code 2222 has been approved by the Defense Business System Management Committee. So, repeat. If you have a business system that costs more than $1 million, the Milestone Decision Authority, the certifying authority, cannot independently move forward without approval from this DBSMC, that committee. That's what I got from that. So if you look on the bottom of page 19, that diagram, it shows you the DBSMC is the approving official. So whether you have their review, they prepare, program manager prepares, the Milestone Decision Authority gives them the information, the component folks are involved, component certifying authority. You have your IRB, Investment Review Board, your certifying gives the information to the certifying authority, and then you have, because it's more than $1 million, then you have to go to approval for that program. So kind of read over that a few more times. Certifying authority, I got that. Personnel. All right, so I'm going to check my notes. Klinger-Cohen. Page 21, 4621, you have the Klinger-Cohen Act. When you deal with information technology, you're going to have to remember the Klinger-Cohen Act, and we're going to look at it. So what did it do? On a quick snapshot on the bottom of page 21, the Information Technology Reform Act of 1996 was called the Klinger-Cohen Act, designed to improve how we manage information technology. It created the Chief Information Officer position. It requires us to use commercial off-the-shelf products before we start from scratch developing our own. Requires the acquisition meets core DoD functions. Requires a determination no private source or existing government agent can better support the function. So Klinger-Cohen Act. And like I said, the chart is probably the best way to do it. Let me see. No unique government modification. So when we use cuts, let's move on to cuts on page commercial off the shelf, the top of page 4625. Make sure you know the definition, but the key thing there is that second paragraph. Commercial off the shelf is defined as commercial items that do not require any unique government modification. So that means if we need an equipment and it's already in the commercial sector and it does not require any unique changes to it to be used by the government, it's a commercial off-the-shelf software to fix whatever the solution is to the problem. So COTS on the top of page 4625, and mention again in the summary. So that's number 6. And then when you go to competency 7, it's now talking about how do we protect our technology. We do all this consideration to consider how do we get information to the user. We use our net centricity or global or gig, global integration system. But now we need to protect it from those information systems that are secret. We don't want to get into the enemy's hands. Cyber, right? Cyber attacks. We got to be able to protect our information. So on page 472 at the bottom, technology protection procedures and guidance are determined to protect designated science and technology information and critical. So those are the two things we're trying to protect. So the DS and TI are the information that's in a lab. We're researching, we're trying to build things. That's our lab, DSTI. And critical program information, your CPI, is your hardware. your DTS system, the system that's actually being used, your hardware, the physical hardware, and the lab. So on page 472 at the bottom, the second to last paragraph, so DSTI is research and technology classified information, and classified and technology controlled unclassified information identified by RDT&E. So that's controlled by the lab. Then the CPI in an acquisition program may be classified or classified, controlled, unclassified. Application, end items, those are the things that are controlled by the program manager. Hardware. So what else do I have? So I know, let me check my notes. So we talk about initial, okay, here we go. It's way back there. So that's as much as I'm going to say on the bottom of page 472. Then we're going to flip to 4710. Working together, RDT&E, your lab and your centers with your program managers, the RDT&E commanding officer, site director, or whoever they design or designate identifies the priorities for that DSTI. Site director, commanding officer. The site director, in consultation with the supporting CI organization, prepares site-specific support plans. So they're the ones, the individuals in charge of those, come up with how we are to protect the information. So what I'm trying to say is on page 4712, the first bullet, the program manager, with the assistance of the working level IPT, determines the existence of CPI. So the two types of information again that we're trying to protect is DSTI or CPI, control critical program information. So I gotta make sure I repeat it. Designated science and technology information in the lab, critical program information, CPI. So the program manager on page 4712 determine the CPI that we have, PM, CPI. Also, it says the program protection plan must be created at milestone B and all subsequent milestones during the life cycle of the program. So PPP, whenever you deal with information technology, a PPP is required, and let's see when, prior to milestone B. I know my throat is aggravating me today. The PPP is revised and updated once every 3 years or as required. If there is no CPI associated with the program manager informs the milestone decision authority as appropriate, and a PPP is not required. So anytime you have information technology in that and is designated by the program manager as critical information, then a program protection plan, how we going to protect the information, must be included. And if you don't have it, it's updated every 3 years, and if you don't have it, then you don't need to do it. Programs and foreign participation. So let's say you're working with allied forces. If you're working with allied forces, then how do we protect our information? When a determination is made that any of the following exists: a technology assessment control plan and a delegation of disclosed authority letter must be prepared. So if you have foreign participation, working with your allies, they're participating, working on that equipment, allied system will be used, the system to be developed. So you look at those considerations, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets on page 4712, and ensure that a TACP, Technology Assessment Control Plan, and delegation of disclosure letter must be completed to protect that information, to say that, okay, foreign entities will be, multinational operation will be using these equipment. on the top of page 13. In program protection, when viewed within the global context of security, risk management, and program protection. Again, every decision you make, there's a risk associated to it. So a risk assessment must be conducted and considered in the management. Risk management is a key element of the program manager's executive decision making. So they're considering the risk. How do we mitigate the risk? Then you come up with the support plan for that. They go again into that program protection plan 4713, as mentioned already, contains CPI that the program manager prepares the program protection plan for. It helps to identify countermeasures. If you have a cyber attack, how do you address it? So those are the things that are considered. And on page 4714, the second paragraph, the PPP is the program manager. So you see how many times I said program manager. So when in doubt in this exam, program manager, unless it's a defense business system, that's that committee that's in charge of it, or the chief information officer. PPP is the program manager's single source document used to coordinate and integrate protection measure for CPI. So remember I said your CPI is the responsibility of your program manager, and your DSTI information is your commander or site directors of those labs. The program manager establishes and approves the PPP for an acquisition program as soon as practicable after validation of that initial capabilities document. So in the beginning, they're already considering, okay, what type of technologies it's going to use? How are we going to protect it? So that's the ICD is all the way in the beginning of that process. Breachlessness, we did that. Technology, threat. All right, so we got a few more pages to cover before we wrap up for today. All right, it's on page 4715. They touch on counterintelligence analysis. When an acquisition program containing CPI, again, program manager determines the CPI, is initiated, the program manager should request a counterintelligence analysis of the CPI. All right, so counterintelligence is done once a CPI is acknowledged or identified by the program manager. 4717. The TACP, Technology Assessment Control Plan, is composed of 4 sections. Program concept, the purpose of the program, nature and scope, technology assessment, and the control plan. So that is the same. The top of page 17 is referring back to the bottom of page 12, where they introduce the TACP program when you deal with foreign participation. So now it's showing you the breakdown of that control plan. Straightforward summary. So PPP. All right, CPI, program manager requests a multidisciplinary counterintelligence threat. Once the CPI is identified, let me change my notes. CPI identified. Risk assessment, PPP, program manager, single source used to coordinate activities for countermeasures, and the 4 sections of the tech assessment and control plan. Okay, all right, so that is your information technology and national security systems and your technology protection considerations. All right, so that's all I have for today to cover CDFM Module 4, Competency 6 and 7. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube page, please go ahead and do so to give us more visibility on the YouTube platform. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I'll see you guys again next time as we continue review of CDFM Module 4, Competency 8, 9, and 10. See you then.